What's up, guys? I'm Old Painless, and today we are looking at the first release from a new company, Transformission, and this is Disorder, who is a third-party representation of Wildrider from the Stunticons. It's a heavily IDW-inspired rendition of the Stunticon team, and of course, they're gonna, when all five are released with Motormaster, it's gonna be the latest combiner actually forming Menasor. So pretty excited about that. I'm a big Menasor fan, and I'm also a pretty big fan of car robots in general. So this is one that I was pretty happy to pick up right here. Now, I did kind of emphasize that it's maybe sort of a new company. Transformission, this is in fact their first release, but they have, from what I'm aware, they've gone on record saying that they're actually affiliated or a sister company with Generation Toys, who I've done 4 reviews for already. They are doing their Gravity Builder Devastator rendition, which I'm pretty excited about. But in case there's any doubts, this box, I mean, this really seals the deal for me. Has that same kind of painted look to the character right there on the front, very much in line with what we saw in Gravity Builder's packaging. The same silver foiling around the border as well. Even the internal box here has that same sort of textured look and feel, which is great. And it has that same black foam insert on the inside. So very similar to what we saw in Generation Toy. Obviously the company logo and stuff up on top. This being more of a black and purple packaging. And I don't want to dwell too much on this, but I think it's kind of interesting just to point out the similarities in their graphic design here. So we're getting sort of that wireframed look of Menasor in the back. And if we just take a quick look here at Generation Toy, bigger box actually, for bigger bot, but same type of layout, same texture, and then we have a green instead of the purple with that wireframed Gravity Builder combiner. So definitely a sister company. I don't think there's really, again, any doubt, but just to show off the comparisons in terms of, you know, how they're presenting their products. I kind of like that uniformity across their different companies. So very, very cool. Now, accessories are bare bones here. I mean, we get the instruction manual. Does a decent enough job. It's nothing too spectacular. And then the only other item that we get would be the actual gun here, which it's okay. It's a little uninspired. I do appreciate the purple. It kind of feels reminiscent of G1. I kind of associate purple a lot with the Stunticons, but it's 2 pieces. It's on a swivel hinge here, so it can actually fold up, and then this will store in the vehicle, which I'll show off in a second. And then the tip of the gun is actually painted black, but nothing too spectacular. Maybe a little boring of a weapon, but you know, gets the job done. And speaking of storage, that pegs in right there, basically where the engine block would be on the vehicle. Now, in terms of the alt mode here, we have what I believe is a Ferrari 599X. I'm not a car enthusiast. I'm not 100% sure on the model, but man, this thing looks sweet. I mean, it's a great looking rendition of the Ferrari. I love the sort of, I can't tell if it's painted or not. It's a sort of a gunmetal gray with what looks like sort of a metallic flecked surface across the entire body. I think it is a paint. It just feels different than anything I've ever really sort of seen before, but it looks really nice. And I really appreciate sort of the G1 accuracy to the that deep red, you know, windshield and windows and the headlights right there. And it has such a nice pop and contrast to that gunmetal. So really sharp looking vehicle mode. Big fan of this. Even the wheels, the rims are painted a nice silver. A lot of sculptural details too, which really kind of lends to the believability and accuracy to the alt mode. You know, a lot of vents and stuff. Sort of that honeycombed grille shape along the front there. You know, some intakes, I believe, or detailing along there on the side. There's sculpted door handles. We do get a gas cap on the side as well, which isn't present on there, so there's no mold sharing. Although it's not painted. I believe in the prototype pieces we saw this as a painted piece, so that's kind of a bummer. You know, I wish they had taken the time to throw some silver on there. These wings on the pre-production copies were really floppy from what I saw from other reviews. These feel like they've been glued. They're very stiff. I've gone through the Transformation, 5, 6, 7 times now, and I mean, they feel really good. They're not actually loose, and they don't feel or look stress marked at all. So, yeah, I mean, it's an element that a lot of people didn't think was accurate to the vehicle, but the Ferrari pictures that I have seen actually do have these on there. So, pretty unique. I like it. Now, one area that looks a little fishy at first is on the trunk. We have these 2 holes here, and a lot of people, myself included, thought these were supposed to be taillights. And in actuality, these are actually vents, air vents, I believe, on the actual vehicle. So they actually do pass air through the car, then out through these vents or ports on the back of the car itself. And so they looked a little bit unfinished initially. They're kind of like these black cylindrical shapes on the back. I mean, they look like they lend themselves to some sort of clear, red plastic as like a taillight or something on the back. But that is accurate to the vehicle. So I definitely won't knock it. It's in fact designed to look like this. So I mean, I think overall as a car, this works out really well. And it scales and looks phenomenally good with other Masterpiece cars. Now the Masterpiece Sideswipe here, as well as the other cars, are more of a shiny or glossier paint finish, where this feels more like a matte finish. But I don't think it's really too out of place. I think these both look pretty good together. I don't really have any complaints in terms of just the fit and finish of the vehicle. If you are a car nut, a car fanatic, you'll probably know better whether these scale in real life together. I don't know that. I couldn't really tell you. But I think from a car on a shelf type display, this could easily work for you. So, very well done. I think this is a very convincing alt mode. One additional note is that the side view mirrors here are rubber, so yeah, no real concerns about that breaking at all. But yeah, very nice alt mode. Now, just to give you a heads up, this is not a pre-production sample that got passed around in some of the earlier reviews and previews of the figure. So if you do buy this order, this is a very good representation of what should be showing up at your doorstep here. With that being said, though, there have been some concerns about stress marks. There have also been some pretty interesting discussions about scale, whether this really is a masterpiece, if it's designed for Masterpiece combiner scale, etc., etc. We're gonna get to that as we get to final thoughts more so, especially the scale discussion. But things like stress marks, this still has them on the final copy, unfortunately. I'm going to show them off as best as I can. They're really minor, quite honestly. I have other figures in my collection from other notable name companies, which are far, far worse than this guy here. But it's definitely worth noting, and I'm going to do my best to sort of show that off. Well, with that being said, guys, let's go ahead and get this sucker transformed so we can check out Disorder in bot mode and see how he stacks up. Alright, so first thing, pop your gun out, throw it away. Unhinge the roof of the car, and pop that up. Do your best to unclip the doors and sort of rotate them down out of the way, and you can kind of pull them out a little bit via the shoulder joint. Unpeg the rear wheels, which allows you to then fold these flaps down. Split the legs and loosen them up from the front windshield here. There's 2 little tabs right there. Inside, loosen up this tab. Loosen up this section, which unlocks the knee, and that will allow you to extend the lower leg down. Rotate the foot around on this hinge system. This is pretty cool. I kind of like how that lower leg is designed. And then fold this metallic silver painted section up under the kneecap. Extend the foot and the heel spur. Fold the back of the leg section down, and this point here will kind of attach underneath this little lip or ridge of the rear wheel well right there, just like so. and then the wheel itself kind of just locks onto the back right there. Tab this section onto that peg right there. And be mindful, this piece of plastic is attached to a clear plastic joint here. Because there is a little bit of a bump on this particular leg, which is a peg for these two panels to kind of connect together, that does bump into this leg panel. So just try to be careful. There you go, getting that piece around. So this leg can then tab together. Now that the leg's done, again, a pretty simple process. Go ahead and rotate the waist 180. And we can start focusing on the upper body here. And this is kind of where we get into some tight clearances. This is on a sort of a hinged system up top, the hood of the car, that is, and it's definitely tight. So what I recommend doing is extending the body outwards and then rotating the arms down, because the idea is we want to get these shoulder joints cleared away from these plastic pieces on the hood of the car and the side of the car. Just get you some more range of movement to manipulate this whole chunk up here. Next, fold these wheels inwards, which will then fold these sections in as well. And the wheels are actually on a ball jointed system, so that as you fold these in, they're actually kind of rotate upwards a little bit. That way we can peg in this section into these pegs on the inside of the hood. Before we get to that point though, we're going to rotate this whole assembly 180 to get that backwards. From here we can now fold these sections in completely, and again sort of maneuver the wheels so they kind of peg into place. Just like so. Loosen up this front assembly. These kind of fold inwards like that. There's really no other position for these to go, so they kind of just sit as is. Unclip these sections. These are on a bit of a small hinge. I'd be careful with these. They feel pretty good, they feel pretty strong, but just be mindful. You want to sort of unclip these and fold them inwards to sort of just condense the backpack a bit more. In doing so though, this side is nice and tight. This can hold the bumper section upwards. This one's much floppier. So, not the most elegant solution, but it works fairly well. The backpack all done. Rotate the arms back up. Unpeg the doors and fold the windows in. Then simply extend the forearm. Rotate 180. Correct the hands if you have to. And then these are on a ball joint, so you can kind of manipulate the door armor or door wing sort of design here to whatever position that you want to. It's also on a ball joint, so you can kind of rock it backwards as well. And with the body basically done, fold out the chest cavity, rock out the head joint, close that back up, and we have Disorder in his robot mode. And man, this guy looks pretty good. You can see it's not a G1 accurate design. It does resemble him. Obviously there's some elements like the little spikes and stuff coming off the side of the head, the color breakdown and whatnot is pretty G1 accurate, but this clearly takes heavy inspiration. I mean, basically this is modeled after the IDW comic book Stunticon designs. So if you're a G1 purist, this may not sort of, really meet the criteria of what you're looking for. But if you like the Stunticons like I do, or if you're a huge IDW comic book fan, this guy's badass, man. I mean, this looks like it just kind of came off the pages. I mean, it really invokes and emulates that comic book design down to a T, including the more organic arm design. Obviously, this is not too similar to what you see on Masterpiece cars, which are a little bit more blocky or traditionally G1, which again is more of a blocky or boxy type of aesthetic. This has more of like a curved cylindrical type of shapes and angles along like the shoulders, the bicep, the forearms, etc. And then, you know, obviously the shoulder armor up here is very much in line with the IDW look right there. I think the head sculpt's pretty nice. I wish there was a little bit more angular. I mean, one thing they could have done to kind of get you a happy medium between the IDW and G1 is get a head sculpt or face that looked maybe just a bit more reminiscent of G1. I mean, this still looks very, again, IDW accurate. I believe, I haven't looked at the comics in a long time, but I think it would have benefited from maybe having some harder lines like from the cheek and jawline there. Someone had pointed out that it kind of looks like he's wearing a neck brace. I can kind of see that too. It does very much invoke the Wildrider head sculpt that I was kind of imagining. I think it works pretty well, but it is, in my opinion, maybe one of the more weaker aspects of the bot mode here. You know, if that's really one of my main complaints of the figure, I still think that actually nails the look pretty well. So overall, the figure itself, you know, I'm pretty impressed by. Now, in terms of color breakdown, this guy is pretty slick. Again, we have that nice gray, I believe, painted surface with that sort of slight speckling or metallic kind of flecks alongside it. I love the shade of red, too. It really just pops and has a nice contrast. And the head, you know, again, despite the sculpt, it's still done very cleanly. The eyes are painted yellow very nicely. We get some great color breakup with the silvers, the blues along the chest, some other little color touches around the abdomen. The silver is crisp. The paint is just really nice. It's done very well. There's definitely a lack of paint on the legs. The thighs are barren in that regard, but we do get some of that additional sculpted detail there as well. And then the legs, such a cool little element. This is sculpturally silver painted detailing, which is not visible in the alt mode at all. I mean, this is actually under the roof of the car. So they went ahead and painted this and sculpted that detail out. So it actually gave you some interesting detail on the underneath the clear plastic shins here. Or, you know, that's such a cool little detail that they did not have to do. But it really just kind of makes the legs pop that much more. Now, in terms of articulation, works pretty well. Head is on a ball joint, rotates, doesn't get much of a up or down motion, but gets you some decent movement nonetheless. The elbows rotate a full 360, although this hinge is kind of odd because it kind of gets you down, or gets the shoulder down in sort of some weird positions if you rotate it too far back. We do get upper bicep swivel. We get a great articulation on the elbow, double jointed there. Wrist swivel, single pinned finger hinge here, which is all standard for Masterpiece. Ball joint and a additional hinge system on the shoulder joints, so these can rock up and down like we showed off before, and they can rock backwards as well. Waist swivel, hip skirts for forward and backwards motion, and the full Van Damme split works really well. Knees only get you about 90 degrees, maybe just shy of 90, but still poses pretty well. We get an ankle rocker. We get some great forward and back toe and heel articulation, which work independently of each other. No swivel down below, but we do get an integrated thigh swivel right at the hip right there. So articulation-wise, this guy gets the job done. I mean, you can pretty much pose him in any kind of pose that you could imagine here. He does hold the gun like a champ. Again, not my favorite gun design here, but looks pretty damn good. In terms of scale comparisons, here he is with an official Masterpiece car, and we do have a third-party Masterpiece, Ocular Max Sphinx. And again, I mean, he lines up pretty much head-to-head with the other Masterpiece cars here. So this leads us into an interesting topic here. Is he a Masterpiece Stunticon? I think the fact that he's an IDW design kind of throws a monkey wrench into that argument. I guess you can make the argument that he's an IDW Masterpiece, right? Like, he doesn't really fit the G1 aesthetic. Although, for me, this actually looks pretty damn good. But if you're a G1 purist and looking for something that's going to walk off the TV screen, this may not do it. You know, you have to be open to the idea of having or expanding your MP shelf beyond just the G1 Sunbow or Sunbow, however you pronounce that, animation model sheet. For me, though, I like this look and I like the scale. I mean, I think this looks really good against other Masterpiece cars here. And the all mode of this guy looks fantastic. I mean, that could easily pass for a Masterpiece car. The only thing really deviating would be sort of the paint finish. Although, again, whatever they did to this finish here looks really nice in person. I did want to show off some of the stress marks here. They're super minor, but along the back side of this hinge here, I don't think it's showing up on camera, but there's a tiny little stress mark on both sides right there. Again, it's really, really minor, but it's something that you want to be careful of. I feel like this ball joint could have been toleranced just a tad bit smoother, and that would have alleviated some of the stress and torque being put on this door. But I think if you're careful with that joint, it's not going to be an issue. Now this peg, you can definitely see there's more of a white line along the inner ridge of that peg, which kind of goes along the base there too. This is one of the pegs that combines or condenses the two legs together. It wasn't there initially, so it definitely sort of popped up after a couple transformations. I mean, I've put this guy through its paces, probably 6, 7, 8 times I've transformed it already today. But definitely something that you want to watch out for. The alternate peg over here doesn't really have that mark. I have seen some other tiny little white stress lines on some of the other internal pegs within the leg, but they're really minor, but something that, again, you do want to pay attention to. I'm not honestly too concerned about it. I have other figures like my Fans Toys Tesla, which is stress mark and actually cracked ridden plastic all around. And I did show off, if you looked at my KFC reflector set, the stress marks in those tabs as I sort of forced that plastic open incorrectly, those stress marks are much more pronounced than anything that I've seen on this figure. So I'm not making excuses for this, but I do know the stress marks are a concern for a lot of folks, especially since this kind of has some affiliation with Warbitron, and people had some bad luck with those figures too. I have a full Bruticus set from Warbitron. The stress marks on this are far less than anything I've had on like my Swindle or my Brawl, which my Brawl actually had, or Heavy Noisy actually had broken hands. So be aware of it, as you're sort of transforming and handling the figure. But I don't think they're as bad as some of the pre-production samples kind of let them on to be, or at least with the final retail copy, they might have ironed something out with the plastic. They are there, but they're not that awful. It's not game-breaking, I don't think. But just be mindful of them. Now, in terms of just sort of complaints I have with the figure, I pointed out this one bumper being a bit looser. I really wish this backpack had a way to tab in like underneath this lip here somehow. Because too often, as I'm sort of handling the figure and posing it, it kind of gets pushed upwards, and I feel like I'm constantly kind of adjusting this to kind of get it into place. Again, it's not a game breaker. It's not truly that awful. It holds a pose pretty well, and this joint feels pretty robust. It just would have been a nice sort of finalizing touch if they could have kind of clipped that into place. Speaking of which, this is actually a really nice detail. This windshield is actually on a hinged system here. So normally in vehicle mode, it'd be pushed upwards like this, but it can actually lay down flat against the body. So as you're pushing this down to put pressure onto it, there's really no risk of this clear plastic breaking. So that's a really good idea by Transformission there. So final thoughts on Wildrider, or Disorder from Transformission. It's a really nice figure. I'm definitely a fan of what they've done with this line. I'm not a huge IDW fan. I mean, I've read the comics. I thought their design in the comic book looked pretty good, but it wasn't something that I was sort of dead set on having in a collection. When I first saw the renders for these and the prototypes and stuff, it definitely caught my eye though, and finally having this guy in hand, I mean, this is a really nice representation of a Stunticon. I love the color breakdown, the articulation's all there. I do think it could have used some ratchets, maybe some ratchets in the hips, for example, would have been a nice touch. I understand the lack of die cast, obviously, with a combiner. they're not trying to put too much additional weight in the actual materials, for posability and stability of the combiner joints. It does feel a little bit lighter, maybe a touch more hollow than what we had on Generation Toys Gravity Builder figures. I do think that the Gravity Builder line feels maybe like a notch or two above this guy in terms of quality. But that's not really a huge knock on this figure, because I think Gravity Builder honestly has some pretty high QC standards, and I think overall the materials and the feel of that line is pretty fantastic. If you are interested in this figure alone should be available for most retailers in the near future, probably within the next week or two, and then the other ones hopefully not too far off. Guys, thanks for watching. I appreciate you checking out my video, and I'm looking forward to finishing off this set and getting Gravity Builder taken care of too. Have a good night, guys.